The low to no alcohol beverages category has grown significantly over the past few years, starting in Western countries and now moving quickly into the APAC region. Within this, beers have been the fastest growing section, so in this edition of the LNA Deep Dive, we're zooming into this and we speak to Becky Keane from zero and low alcohol firm Nirvana Brewery to find out more. But first, we find out more about the processes that go into the making of low to no alcoholic beers.
Non-alcoholic beer can be either made as a normal beer and then it's dealcoholized, so it's either filtered through a membrane that removes the alcohol, or it can be boiled so that the alcohol boils off and leaves the beer. And in the past, that's usually how it's been done. In the past, a lot of alcohol-free beers have a slightly weird taste, and they're often trying to mimic the flavour of alcohol. Whereas we wanted to step away from that and actually look at what tastes good in a beer, which is the flavour of the hops and the types of malt and the fresh ingredients, and just use those to make a really good tasting drink. Basically, we're doing our beers exactly the same way that you would a normal craft beer, but having to really control the amount of alcohol that's formed. So that's why we go up to 0.5%, because we get a bit more freedom to allow the beer to ferment normally, but just in a very restricted way. In the mash tun, we're using a bit less malt, so there's less sugar there to ferment. We also mash at slightly different temperatures so that the sugar comes out a bit less than you would expect in a normal beer. As well as then in the fermentation vessel, the yeast we use is more of a lazy yeast, so it doesn't actually work as hard as other yeasts that you might use in a normal ale. So there's less alcohol being formed.
What are some of the benefits of the way you guys produce your non-alcoholic beers as compared to other processes?
So the main benefit to producing this way is that you're maintaining all the flavour. So all that fresh flavour that you get in the hops, all the sort of delicate compounds of the malts and the yeast, those sorts of flavours can easily be damaged if you're boiling a beer to remove the alcohol. Also, obviously, beer isn't meant to be boiled, so you kind of can end up with this weird off flavour, which can taste a bit strange or a bit artificial. There's also some beers that are made to be unfermented, and then they can be slightly sweet because the malt sugar's still very strong because it hasn't been fermented. So by using slightly less malt, we're not having as much sweetness. And as I said, with the main flavour then comes from the fresh hops. So the benefits to doing the way that we're doing it means that it's a very clean taste, and you can really taste the ingredients.
So I understand you're looking at going into Asia, for example, in Japan particularly.
Yes.
So why do you think Japan is a good market for this category?
We found that a lot of the growth in alcohol-free is coming not from people who countries where alcohol is being restricted, but it's coming from countries where there's a lot of urban areas and people are sort of spending a lot of money on their health and a lot of attention on their well-being. So that's one of the reasons that the UK has been a really popular place for alcohol-free, because there's a lot of health trends going on, a lot of people interested in health and well-being. Same in sort of Australia and sort of Scandinavian countries. And we find that in Japan as well, like there's a lot of focus on health and well-being. And particularly around alcohol, I think there's much more of a intolerance to alcohol in some Asian countries. When we were in Japan, a lot of people were saying to us that they don't respond well to alcohol, so they don't drink. And I think that's where a 0.5% beer can really do very well, because it's somebody might consider it to be a very small amount of alcohol, but if they have an intolerance to it, it's not going to make them sick in the morning like if they drank a normal beer.
Apart from allowing consumers to consume beer during a work day without worrying about getting drunk, getting hungover, are there any other specific benefits or advantages to drinking non-alcoholic beers compared to regular beer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's often a misconception that because it's beer, it's unhealthy. A lot of people think of beer as giving you a beer belly or, sort of being quite an unhealthy drink. But actually, when you remove the alcohol, the calories are much, much lower. So a standard bottle of our beer is usually less than 50 calories, sometimes even lower, up to sort of 30 or even less. Our lager is about 66 calories per bottle, which compared to a normal beer is less than half. So you're getting much lower calories, so it's actually quite healthy for you. Also, nowadays, a lot of people are conscious about their sugar intake. So a lot of the time, if you're not drinking alcohol, your options are lemonade, juice, a lot of sugary drinks. And if you don't really want to drink too much sugar, because perhaps you're not drinking alcohol because you want to improve your health, you also don't want to drink too much sugar either. So actually, a alcohol-free beer is one of the healthiest options you can choose after water, because actually the sugar's very low, the calories are very low, and there are actually quite a few vitamins that naturally occur from the yeast. So you get vitamin B12 and folic acid also quite in quite high amounts, especially in our lager.
What do you think is the consumption trend of non-alcoholic beers in Asia? I think also importantly, how do you see this differ from what you have seen in Europe where you are?
I would say that I think in Japan, a lot of the trends have come from people not drinking because of driving laws. So obviously it's very strict driving laws in Japan that if you have any alcohol in your system, you're not allowed to drive. So I think that has driven a lot of the demand in the past. But I think that what we'll see is people turning to alcohol-free beer for health reasons and for as a personal choice rather than, that because they have to drive. And I think that is actually, it's very similar to what's happening in Europe. People are actually choosing alcohol-free beer for positive reasons rather than for a restrictive reason like driving or pregnancy or health or health condition. And I think that in Japan, and as I said, in sort of South Korea as well, it's the same sort of thing is happening.
Do you think that, low to no alcoholic beverages will ever replace or, take away a large market share from alcoholic beverages moving forward? Especially with what you mentioned, like health and wellness on the rise and things like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think that it will ever replace alcohol, and I wouldn't want it to either. I'm not someone who's teetotal. I also enjoy alcoholic beer, but I think that it will take up a big percentage of the market. So I think that eventually it will just be an option that people just, is quite a common thing to choose. Sometimes you choose an alcoholic beer, sometimes you choose a non-alcoholic beer, and it won't be a niche. It will just be, another style of beer that people enjoy. And I think that it won't ever replace alcohol, but you might just see a bit more of a balance. I think having more choice there means that more people will sort of see it as a viable option, and I think that will help people to reduce their alcohol consumption in general and achieve more of a balance in their own lives. So, as I said, not going completely extreme and ditching the alcohol entirely, but just maybe more often than they were choosing an alcohol-free beer over an alcoholic one because the options are so much better than they used to be.
What do you think the future of low to no alcoholic beverages is going to look like in the next maybe 5 years or so?
I think we'll continue to see more options coming through. And I think, as I said, the more options that there are, the more people will actually start to choose them in a restaurant or a bar as well. So I think one of the things that's held it back recently is that usually there's only one or two options for non-alcoholic beer. And so people might buy one or two and then that's it. They've tried all the ones in the fridge, and so then they don't buy anymore. Whereas actually I think the more options you have, the more people will just keep buying them to test the different options you have. So I think that as more products come into the market and more people stock them, I think we'll continue to see growth in those sort of areas. So I think over the next 5 years it will continue to grow and hopefully become more of a mainstream option rather than a niche.